it's on her end.
I
Obviously
think we should
not.
all go back up there where it was working.
We could all sit in each other,
There we
come
go.
into a chair.
We'll be good.
That's off.
It is. What'd you say?
Go ahead and start.
All right, so we're gonna call to order the March 4th joint meeting of the Planning Zoning Commission and the General Plan Committee. Can we have a roll call, please?
Okay. Commissioner Rolwich.
Here.
Commissioner Edmonds.
Here.
Commissioner McCauley.
Here.
Commissioner Mendoza is absent. Commissioner Merritt.
Here.
Commissioner Pasiak.
Here.
Commissioner Sloan is absent. Michael Edmonds. I said the general plan. Okay. Trish Lamb.
Here.
Robert McCauley.
Here.
Tom Payne.
Here.
Sherry Romley.
Here.
Ron Romley.
Here.
Celia Vandermolen.
Here.
Nancy Best.
Here.
And we have absent Frank Perkins, Ed Steinbach, Norm Freeman, Dan McGuire, and John Morgan. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to discuss character, appearance, sense of community. This came about because of many meetings of the General Plan Committee on this subject. And since the draft was put together, I did get a couple of comments from some members who said, could we put something in, like in an addendum, that addresses this issue? So for the purpose of bringing the planning commissioners, and especially our newest member, up to date, I kind of went back through some of the meeting minutes and the discussions on this subject, and I'm just going to run through that. I always like to start out with this. If you were on the General Plan Committee, you remember this quote. It's an ancient Athenian quote. We will transmit this city not only not less, but greater, better, and more beautiful than it was transmitted to us. Every ancient Athenian who was becoming a leader had to take this oath. And I always thought it ought to be printed on every city and town hall across the country. Okay. Early on in the general plan progress, we had a community workshop and some questionnaires. And there were two areas that we asked people to kind of check off, which were their top qualities about Chino Valley that should be thought of in the vision. Small town image and well-maintained and attractive came up right to the top. Also in the attributes that Chino Valley should be recognized for in the future, small town character and well-maintained, visually attractive came up again. And then during the spring and summer of 2013, there were a lot of discussions on that subject. Things like the scale of buildings should be scaled to human size rather than skyscrapers like in an urban environment. 1 and 2 stories is typical. There's an asterisk, which will be on the next slide. The first story of all buildings should contain pedestrian targeted amenities like, awnings and canopies and display windows, prominent entries, landscaping, street trees, benches, that sort of thing. Then the character of the building should be contemporary southwestern style or ranch style, some kind of a style that enhances a sense of place, so you know you're in Chino Valley. Is there any way to get rid of that static? Okay. Then the reduced, does that help? Okay, somebody did something. The idea also was to move the buildings close to the property line in the front by either reducing the front yard setbacks or making them 0 and putting parking to the side or the rear instead of in front of the buildings. There were possible incentives discussed, like reducing the amount of required on-site parking for people that will put in more of a people gathering space or some other desired amenity. And an incentive to go higher than 2 stories to maybe 3 or 4 stories if they put in residential uses above the businesses, or again, they add a people gathering space or something else that the town wants. Also, there was a lot of discussion about keeping properties clean and free of clutter, and so an attractive appearance would include maintenance of buildings and properties free from clutter. Then there was quite a bit of discussion about how to buffer to mitigate noise and lighting. Earthen berms was one way where when you have a business use or parking area that abuts a residential property, you might put in earthen berms with vegetation, have some walls intermittent but not continuous except to surround trash containers and service areas. Green belts were discussed, which would be wide swaths of native grasses with some pedestrian pathways to connect to other pedestrian areas, and again provide a distance buffer to residential uses. And then the distance or separation of parking lot driveways so that they aren't directly adjacent to a residence. And traffic calming devices in large parking areas that would keep the traffic noise down by not allowing people to just race through a big parking lot. And then outdoor music was obviously an issue in some areas, and so the idea that anything excessive had to be contained within the building. Some low-level music might be permitted for outdoor seating on the street side of a use where there is outdoor service for food. And then low-level lighting, again so that you don't have a lot of light pollution, but the types of lighting that are needed for pedestrian and parking safety would be permitted but restricted to hours of operation of the business. So these were the things we talked about. Then again, it came up in the fall of the general plan meetings to again talk about the appearance of buildings and their orientation for privacy to existing residences. We talked again about the buffer areas, screening walls, lighting and noise control, and screening of parking and locations of driveways. So these issues kept coming up again and again and again throughout the year. So into the general plan draft and the land use element, we were talking a lot about community cores where there'd be a mixture of uses of non-residential with residential, and that there'd be this pedestrian orientation, the importance of the building appearance, colors, street trees, vegetation. The general plan committee said these were all very important. And so a step towards accomplishing one of the strategies was to add development standards to the UDO for compatibility, and those would cover appearance, landscaping, signage, lighting, and noise, as well as buffering adjacent residential uses. And so tonight, the question comes up. I went out and took a bunch of pictures of some of the newer buildings in Chino that we might think of as the type of attractive appearance to see if this is something you want to have us talk about as an addendum to the general plan. It would not be a regulation. A regulation is the zoning ordinance, the UDO, but the general plan could have an addendum added to it that would discuss what the purpose of all of this is about, so that it would beef up the idea of putting, there are some parts of the UDO today that address these things, and I don't exactly know why some of them haven't been adhered to, but maybe it's needed in the general plan to get that type of thing to happen. So let me move on to the next one, which were photographs on community image and, you know, the sense of community as well as individual buildings. Now, since our last meeting with the General Plan Committee, this wasn't there. And I hadn't been in town for over a month, and so I was very pleasantly surprised to see that. I personally think that this and the statues are very pleasing. I think, can we turn off the light over there for these photographs? That's great. The kind of masonry that's used here, the color and the type of, I guess it's split face masonry, I think is very vibrant looking, that it gives a good image of the community. In fact, I wondered if, because Chino had put this and the sculptures up, I heard talk that Prescott is now considering putting in a new type of welcoming monument, since they only have the old-fashioned signs saying "Welcome to Prescott." So this whole idea here that you're driving into a community that seems to be modern and vibrant might be a good image. We were talking about branding as part of the image for the community. Now, the first place that stood out in my mind is this. I'm going to show you two different views. Here you are driving at the highway, and you see this interesting looking building, but it's pretty far away. And as you get closer, you start to see the architectural style and the materials and the textures. There's stone and siding, and then after you get out of your car and take a picture, you can see that there's quite a bit of really good architectural detail in this building. Unfortunately, you can't see it from the road because it's so far back. Same thing happens here. You see an interesting massing building, and you have to get closer and closer to see more of the architectural detail. And this was interesting to me, that a lot of the buildings that I took pictures of happened to use kind of a stacked stone and a beige stucco appearance. This is another one where it looks like there's some interesting forms to this building. But, you know, as you pass it and you see this huge blank surface on this one side of the building, it makes you wonder, was something else planned to be there? Because the rest of the building, those curved forms and the stone and all, are very interesting. And then there's this blank surface, so I don't know what that was about, but it is something to think about in terms of interest to the viewer. And then again, we get into another very interesting building. And several of these have metal roofs. They have the stone trim and the painted stucco surface. Also, these buildings all have pretty nice looking landscaping that enhances the architecture and softens the driveways. This building, because we talked about, you know, contemporary Southwest or Western, and then we talked about ranch style. I think this could fall into either category. Again, we have the stucco and the kind of beige looking, and the ranch style with that covered porch area. It's a modern contemporary look. Now this building is totally different, but also quite interesting. And the use of landscaping, again, softens the architecture. I wanted to go back. Whoops, wrong direction. Why isn't it? Oh, let me. Yeah. Particularly as you approach the building, the landscaping is more prominent. Even with the xeriscape type of idea, you know, there's a sculptural tree and hedges, and the signage duplicates the style of the building. So these are all little details that we think about. And now I thought this was another example of a ranch-style building, and you know, it just reads ranch style. The old Stockman's Bank also was kind of a ranch style with the covered porch area and use of stucco. Again, you know, these beiges are very prominent. Now, I took a picture of this. It's an older area, but it has a parapet wall. And just as an example of the type of kind of older Western theme, if we wanted to do that as a suggested style, the parapet walls. Now, this again has a covered pedestrian area, and there is a use of landscaping, that hedge there, to kind of protect the pedestrians from the parking area. This is another type of parapet wall, and, you know, again, the ranch style thing. Now, this was interesting because this is much further north where there aren't a lot of attractive buildings, but this is a very attractive building. Use of stone and stucco again, and it is interesting that the people who built this, maybe they stuck their neck out, or maybe they just had pride in their business to want to build something really nice in an area that has a lot of older, sometimes rusted old metal buildings and things like that. This is mostly the industrial part of Chino. Right next door is this building, which is a ranch style, quasi-ranch style building, which could be enhanced with some detail in the parapet and some landscaping. And lastly, I just thought I'd throw this in to show that stone has always been a building material in Chino, in this historic building, which I think is a fantastic building. I would hope someday it'll get reused and become a prominent building. Okay, that we can go back through any of these if you want, but I just wanted to show them as some examples. Maybe need the lights back on. Yeah. Okay. Oops. How do we? Oh. Do you? Nope. Okay. So, the purpose again is to talk about what are the wishes of the committee and the commission. Do you want something addressed in the, is that it? Addressed in the general plan as an addendum? Some thoughts that occurred to me, you know, why should a community get involved with this? What's important about creating community character and appearance? When you create an aesthetic value, I think it promotes economic development and a quality of life for the residents of a community. I think it promotes the sense of place, and I think it's a way to promote the goals and strategies of the general plan. So those are issues that we can talk about. And design objectives would be that you want to emphasize architecture and landscaping rather than parking lots. And you want to protect views and visual image by using screening and buffering. So that's the rationale. Now it's open to your discussion. You tell me what you'd like to do.
Well, we really talked about this a lot in developing the general plan. And personally, I feel to avoid having what we have, to use your word, we're going to enhance the community if we come up with some type of architectural design. And there was some pushback on that because people said, well, you can't tell builders how to build. But I think if we can suggest to them that if we have a common theme, it's going to make it more appealing for people to come here. like Old Town Scottsdale, you walk down there, they've got an area, people go there to experience the West. If we had a model, or if we started developing in that area, maybe people would come to Chino Valley to say, hey, you wanna see a really neat town? Let's go to Chino Valley. Cause, I mean, this is a unique piece of the planet. It really is. It's beautiful. And I think people need to know about it. I'm done.
Well, I think we had several people discuss this, and the public came, and I thought the consensus was to kind of keep a Western appearance, especially with the horses that's up there as they're greeting people who come in. The disappointment to me was the fact that Old National Bank would look more like a Western building than anything else, and they stuck with it. It still has a ranch appearance, but I don't look at it as a ranch. It's got that awning, but there's subtle things that can be done to keep that motif here. And I think, but what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that the councils and the future commissions, you guys are okay. Stick with that theme and not listen to a contractor that comes in. And the reason they come in is because it's easier for them, no offense, it's easier for them, and they make more money doing it a more conventional way. I've often used, if you guys have noticed, the Walgreens on Gale Gardner Way, right on that corner, all they did, difference between ours, our Walgreens looks like a Walgreens in all 48, how many states we have now?
50.
Well, I'm old, so, but all they did was add an awning.
Right.
They added the awning and changed it just a little bit, and it looks more Western, it looks more appealing. And I think what we need to do is with a lot of these, I think we saw some kind of a video or something on how even like Jack in the Box and some of these more nationwide things are starting to change, and they can change to a real good, nice-looking motif that would fit in a community, and they're not objectionable to that.
Right.
So I don't know. I think what we need to do is stick with whatever we decide to stick with, and put it in the UDO, or put it in whatever, so it'd be a lot tougher for somebody to come in and change. You've got the human factor of the people that sit and make decisions, the final decisions, that could change all of this. But I think that's what we need to do.
Well, I think if you look at Wickenburg's a good example, where they put guidelines in of what they could construct. You look at that town, they decided to go in and make it an old Western type of town. They applied the characteristics to all of their buildings and stuff, even the new, when they were putting the roads in, they did the same, actually copied them, with the horses to welcome people into their town. It really is great, but they had to set, long time ago, they set those guidelines, and that's what people followed. It's not that they were told, you have to build this guy, but they had to have certain things to make it look similar. I mean, nothing looks exactly alike, but look similar and have that characteristic. And it looks great, and it's a great town to go to. And I know that, I like our town, and I think we can do some of those things, I sit there and look at after being on the general plan and all these great ideas. I think we can really do that, but it has to be in there and give guidelines to people coming in for it to be.
Well, I don't have an objection to any of that, especially in the core areas, or even along the highway corridor. But I'm not so sure we want to go that far in industrial areas, or heavy industrial areas. Don't get me wrong, I think those people should still have
this is a burr under my saddle. A few months ago, people, thank you. Somebody picked up on it. A few months ago, the guy down there at the auto body shop, Speedway, or I can remember, Contos or Chontos Drive or something, came in here. Thank you. They came in here and they made a big pitch. Oh, we can't do this, we can't have bushes, we're gonna do this, we're gonna put a fence up, we're gonna make it look pretty. It's a disaster area down there. It looks like a junkyard. There's stuff everywhere, and I'm offended by that. They came in here and made a pitch, and this commission bought, we actually, I believe we bent over backwards to meet their requirement, and we should not have done that. It goes right back to what you just said. We need to have a plan, and we need to stick to it. And when I think about it, when they put the cell tower in, they asked for all kinds of special accommodations there, and we granted them. If we had not granted those accommodations, they would have had to put the landscaping in, and it would be pretty. It's not that it's kind of a blighted area anyway, but I think every time somebody comes in here and asks for relief from what they're supposed to do, unless it's absolutely compelling, I think we should say, you know what, you really need to do what you need to do. We're trying to have a common theme here, trying to make it nicer for everybody.
I agree with what you're saying to a degree, but also in the industrial areas and where you would set up a manufacturing facility, something like that that is not on the highway or in the areas where the public is kind of getting impression of the town. Those places, their whole sole purpose is to generate revenue for the person who built it, and that revenue gets taxed and employs people in Chino Valley. And we need to do everything we can to encourage that, because right now, not much is happening in Chino Valley. And it's good to have these things set up, and my question would be, the pictures that we saw, those buildings that David took, to me, sort of fit the wordage that we have here. And if we could establish wordage that would deliver buildings like that, then that would be the accomplishment that I think all of us are shooting for. And in defense of builders, we only build what the customer wants.
But you guys are always the ones coming to the commissions to fight them, either you or the real estate people. Let me say one thing.
We have to fight for the customer.
I agree with you when it's off 89, but we forced Corey Mendoza, one of your commissioners,
Mhm.
to put in landscaping and everything in his trucking company right there on 4 North, off the highway. It is a very nice looking place.
Very nice looking place there.
You know, I mean, the thing of it is, it doesn't take a lot to make it look good. With regards to his comment on the Choctaw Drive, we went over and looked at it. I was at the meeting that night, and I know, I was trying to think of the lady's name that was doing the pitch. DeWitt, Mary DeWitt, who used to be really big here in Chino, but now I think she's moved. But the thing of it is that we looked at that piece of property, and we looked at listened to what you guys.
Oh,
I got
There's
a
one
question.
more.
Would it be conceivable to put into a UDO ordinance something controlling this, not a specific ordinance, but the fact that it has to be themed this way on the 89 corridor?
You can do design guidelines, it's not impossible to do.
And then have it fit right in.
Okay, there's two different things. I think guidelines, I was looking through there is a section of the UDO, which is called Design Concepts. And it has a lot of this stuff in it. So does the landscaping requirements section. One of the drawbacks to the way this is written now is that most of it says should and may. An ordinance should always say is required, And so I don't know if that's the reason that in some places they've abided by this, in other places they haven't. I don't really know. So all of those things, the regulations are laws, so they should say, they're not guidelines, they should say, this is what's required. Something that is more in the guideline idea could be put in as an addendum to the general plan so that it sets the stage for why the UDO has been upgraded to implement that part of the general plan.
So maybe the language that's already in the UDO could very easily become the guidelines in the general plan, because they already talk about most of these things that we're talking about here.
Yeah,
And
well,
then just
yeah.
rework the UDO to require, you know, again, this is one of the things that I deal with all the time, you know, not paving driveways or parking lots or things like that, because, well, they can do it if they, you know, are changing the use, but maybe not if they whine enough, you don't have to make them do it. And I would just as soon have it say, this is what's required, this is what is not, because then I'm standing there trying to convince somebody, you need to pave your parking lot because it's dusty and the neighbors are complaining. Well, it doesn't say that. It says I can if I want. So to be able to have some clarifying language that says this is required, this is not required, is helpful in enforcement. A lot of the issues that we have are things revolving around code enforcement and things revolving around, well, Choctaw is a good example, where we tried to accommodate somebody, and what did we get?
Aggravation.
You know, and for 12 months now, we're gonna get these complaints until he gets that fence up. And then, you know, that may not even do it. So to be able to say, these are the standards you need to, with which you need to comply as a developer, they'll do it. They'll complain, but they'll go back to their customer and say, look, you're gonna have to put in 15 shrubs.
It killed me, she said it turned me off.
And they'll do it. When we did the solar project out, north of, Old Home Manor, we said to them, here's the landscape requirement. Rather than have you put it out here, we want it here, so it makes an attractive entrance. They said, fine, we'll do it. It's not like other communities don't ask these same things and they have these same requirements. There's no reason for us to go, well, you know.
Like if the developer when building a house has building codes he has to
Right.
follow, and he has other requirements from fire department and everything else, and so there's no reason to say, well, you do whatever you want here, but you have to be specific on all these other codes.
We had the Parkway plan in Prescott Valley that set forth design guidelines and criteria for signage, for buildings, color palettes, all that kind of thing for a chunk of Prescott Valley. And we said, okay, here it is. If you're gonna build, this is what you need to follow. This is what your signage needs to look like. It has to have these features. And if you go through like the entertainment district now and where Walmart is, you'll notice that these signs now match what was in that document. So it's not impossible to do, it's not unheard of. It's gonna be a huge sea change for this community because they're used to being able to, you know, not pay parking and so forth. But I do agree that when you get into these industrial areas that are off of 89, that you don't need to have a western facade for a car seat manufacturer or, you know, something like that.
Well, I want to go back and address the industrial, because I agree that there's some standards that they shouldn't have to do, but the landscaping, and, you know, because we drive through those areas to get to residential areas. So our town, the way it's structured, the difference, you know, it's like I came in when Prescott was going to do some enhancements, and so the town of Chino requested that they do landscape around the wells. The well sites were so,
Sorry, guys.
the well sites were so bad, and yet they finally got them done, and it just made it that much nicer. I mean, it just know, and everybody was complaining, but but then when they did it, because you drive through neighborhoods, it's right next to the schools and stuff, so I don't know. And that's how.
I agree. I think site development standards are key, no matter what zoning district you're in. But do they have to take it to the next level?
Right.
I don't think so.
Well, a prime example is the photo that she showed of, I don't know whether you guys know it or not, but that, of the funeral home.
Mhm.
All that is facade in the front.
Right, that's right.
All the
Metal
rest of
building.
it is, all the rest of it is modulars or whatever he had back there originally. He just built on a porch and cleaned up and put just parking.
You can take an industrial zone and put like, shrubbery or something like that in front of the landscaping, and it improves it tremendously. It's not just a raw, tough parking lot with everything like that.
But it softens it.
Yeah, it's just like Safeway over there, they've got this shrubbery out around their parking lot, and it softens it quite a bit.
Okay, so can we say that it sounds like everybody's, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I have kind of an off comment, but your first picture was of the entryway, and my first reaction to that is, where is the landscaping?
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing there, and it's unfortunate because I
We're
think that
growing
would,
rocks there.
It's a boulder.
very tiny, tiny, small rocks that are
The
kind of
scale.
scattered about, and I think it's very unfortunate that we didn't enhance that more.
Well, I have a question too, and this is off, that the welcome sign, the material that they use,
You can't see it.
well, and that, because it shines the light, like if the sun is just right, the sun will hit you. But I'm looking at the type of material that they use there, and here we're trying to, it's more modern, it doesn't seem to fit with the town concept that we have. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but
Oh,
I've had other comments from people about that material that was used.
Well, I think the lettering, and this is kind of
Yeah,
off
that's
again,
it.
on a different, it blends in so much with that material that it's not noticeable. Where if it was a different color or darker color lettering, it would definitely show Chino Valley a lot easier. So little things like that make a big difference. When you start looking at that.
And the lettering on the sign that says Town Hall is really, I don't know why, there's a black background. If you're going to do a black background, make it white letters, So somebody, I don't know who's in charge of making those decisions, but they're obviously not graphic artists. Yeah.
Those bold letters were already made, and so the black background was what they added to give it a little bit of definition because of how you would.
Did anybody ever think about putting up a big flagpole out there? Because that would really designate
That's actually
where,
been planned, and I thought it was
Town
purchased,
Hall is,
I thought the town hall did have a flagpole on the way, but I don't know whether it happened to it, obviously it's not there yet, but it was discussed, so certainly it was on
because
that.
the most prominent thing you see when you're driving north is the little metal fire station next door, which is not a good symbol.
When you talk about adding an awning or something like that at Walgreens, be a little bit careful, because what you just did was you added several thousands of dollars, probably $25,000, just to add that little thing there, and then your property value, they're gonna be paying you for that for the rest of their life, and that's gonna be a lot of money. One of those businesses that you put up there is a nice, beautiful representation, almost went out of business because they got the tax bill. And so you're adding expense and overhead to these businesses that may be a nice little add to our community, but if it turns into an empty building, so you gotta be careful with that.
We don't have property tax here.
How about the
County
letters?
property tax.
Oh, county.
You have a state property tax.
So we
You've got-
didn't do it, the county did.
Norwalk, California used them, and as they age, they look better.
I love them, I think, I don't know, sunny day, all you see is blue sky and clouds over there.
Right through when the sun goes, right to the right. That's bad.
May I make a comment?
Yes.
First of all, guidelines are fine, but you can't enforce them. It has to be a regulation. And they should be done, regulations should be written for every zoning district, so that your industrial has a different standard then your residential, your light, commercial have a different standard from other zoning. So it's gonna be, if you're gonna say, okay, here's our regulation on landscaping, you're gonna find that it's gonna be all over the map as to what you're expecting for each different zone that we're enforcing. And then, another comment is that, and forgive me because it's the type of work I've been in, if a developer can't afford to develop, he shouldn't develop. So when the guy comes in and says, I can't afford to do what you want, I don't wanna pay my parking lot, sorry, don't do the job. And you might lose some business. But you should have a very consistent standard and apply it to everyone equally. That being said, I do have an objection to saying you want the buildings closer to the road because normally you enter the building, so if the parking is in the back, you're gonna find the entrance in the back. That's only logic as to, you're gonna park and walk into the building, you're not gonna walk around.
Well, I disagree with that, depending on where you are, what town you're in. If you are in Old Town Scottsdale, most of the parking is either parallel parking to the road or it's in the back and you end up having to get to the street frontage to walk from building to building. And I think that's the pedestrian type of atmosphere that we're trying to suggest. So when you bring those buildings closer and you push the parking in the back, not only does it bring that scale down, but it also creates something where you have to get out and walk and interact and go into different stores.
Many places that have parking in the rear will have a rear entrance, plus an entrance on the sidewalk anyway, unless they only have one side or the other that they occupy. So you know, you can go either way. If you're walking down the sidewalk, you can go into the front or behind door, whichever way you want to call it. If you park out back, it'd be the same thing.
Okay, I'm taking notes on everybody's comments. Okay, I think we have somewhat of a consensus, if we don't, please speak up, on the need for some kind of landscaping requirements and enforcement of those requirements. So that's correct? And this is, now most zoning codes, Gary, I will tell you, will list design development standards, and they will say applicability section, and then they name all the districts it applies to. And usually it's all the same. They usually exclude single-family residential only. So if the committee wants to exclude certain kinds of industrial or certain locations, because that's another way to do it, you can say, if it fronts on 89, you do these things. Or if it's in a new core, you do these things. And you're not required to do it if you're not in either of those circumstances. So that's one aspect. The other one is you can just decide that if you have a heavy industrial area, you're going to exclude it. Or, I can't remember how many industrial, we have 2 industrial districts?
Commercial light, commercial heavy, industrial.
Okay, so, you know, I would think you're going to want to have requirements for both types of commercial because they're all along the highway. And the industrial, is that north of 4 North?
There's
Is
some
that where
north
most of
of
it
4
is?
North, there's some intermixed, there's a couple of spots that have combined zoning, and industrial is one of them, it's a commercial heavy industrial. It would not be difficult, I don't think, to come up with some sort of plan that coincides with the new land use map to say, you know, these guidelines apply to these areas. And then, if you're off 89, you have an industrial commercial building, then you don't have to apply to this part, but you do with the others. The landscaping is required, but this is not.
I think there should be some landscaping for every project.
Sure.
Even, I've done a commercial project here a couple of years ago in town for a gentleman that block fence. There's no way to see it when it's in place until you pull into the business, but some landscaping should be required, but it needs to, the stuff that's out in front of the bank that we saw is not gonna,
Do much for the
well,
manufacturing.
the whole purpose of a manufacturing facility is to get as much use out of the property as you can. That doesn't mean that it has to look like a prison, but also it means that the landscaping for that should be different than what it is for a bank on the highway.
Right. And I think those standards are something that we can develop.
And
So
the
that-
standard sounds to me better than a recommendation.
Yes.
Well, standard, I mean, the section should really be called Design and Development Standards.
Standard, right, absolutely.
Yeah, concept is certainly not the right
Right,
word.
concept is a nice idea.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, that's, well, how do you design, how do I enforce a concept?
Right. A standard would be easier to do, and it's not that I'm in favor of cookie cutter anything. I
Right.
think people should have the right to do what they want to do with their property and still fit into the community. But, if we could set a standard that delivered all those buildings that we saw in those pictures,
Sure.
then I think we would have accomplished the goal that everybody here was after. Just how to go about doing it.
Well, we'll add it to the list.
Okay, so I still want to get down to, do we have consensus then that landscaping is an important required element for any kind of business use, whether it's commercial or industrial? Now, you know, some of the places I've seen where really large industrial plants go in, they usually have one part of their building that's for offices, and then the manufacturing is in the rest of the building. And they'll make that area very attractive, and they'll put the landscaping there, so it may be ways that we can write code that way.
Right, I would think that would be something that anybody who owned a building would want to have as nice as they can make it. without
Right.
breaking the bank to do so.
Okay. All right, so I think I'm hearing that we're all together on landscaping. Now, what about this Western architectural style? To think of what's going on with the sesquicentennial, or however you pronounce it.
Sesquicentennial.
So, thank you. That Prescott's about to have, their thing is going to be the New West, the Old West, and something else. And so, you know, the New West, you know, they're going to play up the aviation industry and stuff, and technology or something. But I'm thinking contemporary Western architecture, like the bank buildings that we looked at. I would call those contemporary Western. Whereas the ranch-style ones and the ones with parapet walls and all of that might be more Old West, I guess. So
Traditional ones.
Traditional West, thank you. So, I mean, is that the kind of language you'd like to see, that there could be, the architectural style is either traditional or contemporary West?
I'd be for that.
Well, if it's western, southwestern.
Yeah, you know, I started thinking about Southwestern. This is not a Southwestern town. I mean, we have no, you know, really, I saw one Mexican restaurant, you know, that looked like a Mexican building. And, you know, we don't have a bunch of Spanish mission tile and arches and stuff like that. And I don't think you all want to create something you're not. So, you know, it seems like the sculpture, because we've got the horses, the horses say the West, and that's at your entrance, so just stick with the Western idea. Okay, but we're going to need to, my thinking is to maybe take some of these photographs and put them into this addendum to say, you know, contemporary Western architecture, like these examples, you know, are the essence of the image this town wants, you know, or something like that. So, because you have to come up with a way to get people to understand what the West is. Otherwise, they're going to put up a box and they're going to say, well, it looks like a pueblo to me, you know. That's the West, you know. So you have to say something about the features of the architecture, and that's why I was pointing out there's stone and stucco metal roofs, you know, these kinds of features. We need to say what they are. Otherwise, poor Ruth is going to be fighting a battle with every guy who comes through the door who's going to say, of course this is Western.
Yeah, built it in
Right.
Chino.
Yeah.
It's Western.
So we have consensus on landscaping, and we have consensus, can I say we have consensus on Western architectural styling, both contemporary and traditional? Okay.
We're requiring this of the commercial buildings, the future commercial buildings to come in?
Right.
In certain areas.
I thought we were just talking about the 89 corridor.
Yeah.
And the core communities.
Right. I think
Okay.
that's what everybody
Yeah,
agreed on.
that's what I
So
understood
that
too.
if you're in an industrial zone, you're not gonna be hit with it. Or you shouldn't be hit with it.
Are we gonna require McDonald's to put a hat on top of their arches?
Sombrero.
Please, sombrero. Too far
That's
south.
more south.
There's been a lot of areas that have required McDonald's not to even put up the arches.
Yes.
So, I mean, that can be done, but they're an existing business already. If they go for a remodel, that could be a different story.
But let me tell you about the
Is that what we're talking
chains.
about, though?
The chains have all kinds of architecture, signage, and logo stuff. They have a whole portfolio, because when I was playing director of Prescott and the first McDonald's came into this region, guy came in and he wanted to put up, you know, a 100-foot high arch. And I said, not in this town. And he just flipped open his portfolio until we found one that I thought would fit. And that's what he did. So Walgreens will put up an awning if they know that that town is requiring the Western look. You know, now if you're talking about a little mom and pop with this financial burden, that's different than a chain. You know, so what do we want to do with those?
And it's absolutely critical, and that's absolutely what we have in this community, and a lot of mom and pops. And I don't want to drive them out, and I don't want, I'm sorry, I don't care, I think it's still cookie cutter if you limit it to one style. I love the library over in Prescott Valley. I'd love to see that building here, we just ruled that one out.
Thank goodness.
Well, you know, but that's, you know,
I get what
that's
you're
what,
saying.
that's what our, you know, that's what the human condition does, it wants to express itself.
I agree with Tom. I mean, I love that building also, and I know some people either love it or hate it, but I think some of the materials relate to what we're talking about, you know, using the metal and the rusted sheet metal and stuff that would tie in with the Western style.
Okay, so let's talk about materials then.
Just to follow up on that, most people moved here liking variety, and I mean, we've already moved here, we chose this. If we wanted Southwestern, or we wanted Pueblo, we would've went to Sedona, but we didn't. Now we're trying to make this, and boy, everybody I talk to in this community says, you Californians or you Tempeans, go home. We don't want Tempe here, we don't want that. So,
How about Mesa?
you know, I mean, you hear that a lot.
Yeah.
This is not
You hear that a lot.
Scottsdale.
This is not Scottsdale, this is not Sedona. We don't want blue arches. We like our golden arches.
But, you know, but there's a difference, it's like the yellow building, I have to bring it up. The yellow building, I mean, that shouldn't, I mean, that's not something, and those are the things that shouldn't be here. You know, I love a lot of the old buildings and stuff they have, but that should, so somehow we have to come up with some kind of standard, something that says, no. Because, you know, if you remember Norm Freeman, he was trying to get that tag, you know, that whole thing to make Chino Valley more of that kind of town, with the horses and with the, you know, and so, you know, and trying to keep, you know, I know people don't like themes, but, and it is a little bit of a theme, but But I tell you, that when you look at Wickenburg, how they thrive when they finally set some
It's a lot easier to
standards.
market.
Yeah.
It's hard to market a yellow muffler shop.
It is.
And a blue tire shop.
Yeah, that's true.
Mardi Gras.
Well, Tom, you raise a really good point, but, is Chino going to be the last town in the state that's not going to have any design development standards? Everybody else, I mean, that stuff started in the early 70s.
That you lose.
So what else could we add? You don't think contemporary and traditional Western, you think that's too tight?
And realizing that I think we're trying to establish it for the 89 frontage.
Yeah. And new construction too, more than taking the existing construction, mom and pop go to open their business, they're renting, say,
Yeah.
okay, you gotta remodel to fit this, I mean, you just move in the building that's there and meets the requirements you have to meet that are already in existence, and then go from that.
We're talking more new construction.
Yeah.
I get that, and I'll just refer back to the business that we almost lost because he got hit with a $24,000 tax bill instead of the $3,000 tax bill that he was getting. And you just added a layer of overhead to business that can be controversial.
Could you explain that? Because I don't know what you're talking about.
It was Chino Valley Animal Hospital. When they remodeled and they built that building down there, their tax bill just jumped right through the roof.
Right there.
So this building existed and then they remodeled it?
I don't know how much of it they remodeled and how much is all.
It was pretty extensive.
It was, yeah.
Pretty extensive project.
So, but I mean, does remodel mean enlarge, that they made it a lot bigger than it was?
They had additions to they did a huge tenant improvement to the property. All of what you see in this picture was not there to begin with.
Well, that has something to do with why the tax bill went up. They probably tripled the size of the building.
I don't know about square footage.
I don't know that they added that much it is the assessment for the facade.
That's my point.
But they could have appealed that if that was the only reason it went up.
The feeling of the government works well.
And they may have also hit just the right time when everybody's taxes went through the roof, so.
Maybe we could, without being too restrictive, maybe we can specify certain types of materials on the exterior, which would not necessarily dictate form, but at least it would have a look. Stone,
Okay.
stucco, split-face block.
But I'm not sure that needs to be done. I'll tell you, in my opinion, when they built the Days Inn, and she showed the two shots, that's kind of the same architectural idea for the bank. And there's a lot more buildings that's supposed to be built in that area, and I think you're gonna see most of them stay with that same theme to look nice together.
Well, I think that's great, but without becoming cookie cutter, because I'm totally against people being told what to do with their property, except to fit the community. But if that's the case, then what's making those folks conform to that particular look? That's what we need to institute for the whole highway frontage in the main areas that are going to be seen.
I don't know.
I'm worried we're getting a little bit too far toward we want to be an architectural review committee.
Well,
Yeah, which I disagree
And
with.
further away from.
it's already in your code.
Well,
I mean, and,
Trust me.
That's the human factor.
they actually list all the materials in the code.
Materials, we're getting very specific, and we're getting more toward that, what he's afraid of, where everything is gonna sort of start to look the same.
Well, this is quite a variety. I'm just going to read it off because probably not everybody, this is way in the back of the code and probably very few people have read it. Okay, materials include but are not limited to, so that's an opener right there. Brick, adobe, mortar wash slump block, stone, natural or faux, integral color, sandblasted or stain textured masonry, split face or scored concrete masonry units, textured tilt-up concrete panels, stucco, metal roofs, concrete and clay tile roofs, clear and tinted glass, and architectural metal. What should not be included are untextured tilt-up concrete panels, prefabricated steel panels, corrugated metal, highly reflective glass, and grooved plywood. So it's like, except for those 5, it sounds like anything else is allowed.
Can you read those again?
The 5? Untextured tilt-up concrete panels, prefabricated steel panels, corrugated metal, highly reflective glass, and grooved plywood.
Preformed metal panels, is that what you?
Untextured ones. Tilt-up
that's-
No, no,
concrete.
the metal panel.
Oh.
Prefabricated steel, yes,
Okay,
corrugated.
well, that could be, any steel building could be considered
So
prefabricated
you
steel
can't,
panel.
can't do it above the building.
Yeah, well.
This is the exterior. They're talking about the exterior of the buildings.
That's,
Yeah.
all
Okay.
steel buildings have preformed metal panels.
But you can build a
But you
steel
can build a
building
facade.
and put a.
And then you put a facade on it.
Because you're quantity.
Yeah.
A good example is the dollar store that
Yeah,
just.
you
So
know,
I
you
get
need that,
that,
you're
but
all
if
set.
you, it didn't say that, it said you should not use these, it didn't say where you should use them.
The Home Depot and Hobby Lobby in Prescott Valley were both built with tilt-up concrete panels.
Which there's nothing, well, so's the
Yeah.
theater, Harkins Theater is all concrete built up. But if you put a texture to it and you make it architecturally attractive, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. And that's what's allowed here, textured
Right,
tilt-ups,
textured.
yeah. So, I mean, that's the idea, is do you want to make the architecture interesting, or do you just want Quonset huts all over town? I mean, you know,
It depends
there's,
on where it is, because I don't think my print shop has to look like that. I think my print shop looks just fine the way it is.
But you're not
And if
on
I'm
the-
gonna pay for
And
that,
nobody's
You're not-
driving
you're
in
in
there to get
industrial
to
area,
their
right?
home either,
Right.
you know, that area.
so, but according to that code, it might not have been allowed to be built unless, because you didn't specify where that was.
Is
Well-
your zoning industrial out there, Tom? That's- See, they're just talking commercial light, commercial heavy on 89.
no, we aren't, we're
Apartments in there.
talking about, we'll have to pin that down, but what is in the code now just says, design concepts apply to all new commercial and office developments, as well as developments requiring site plan review. So it doesn't say what districts or anything.
So if I wanted to build my building now, I'd have to build it like that, and I couldn't afford it. So,
Well,
If you build
right.
something greater than 5,000 square feet, it requires site plan review. In fact, yes, that's the way it's written right now.
So, we're now talking about only if they're fronting on 89 or within a community core.
so you're gonna add that verbiage.
Yeah, so, I mean, what I'm trying to get are the
Fronting
things we
89.
have fronting 89, yeah.
You get that long walkway to it.
Because, I mean, we have heard people say, you know, anything within 1,000 foot of the highway has to have that. No metal building within 1,000 foot of the highway. That says pretty much everywhere.
Right.
Well,
think
you know,
there's any
typically you'd
intent.
say the property fronting the highway. So if there's a, well, let's get into the placement of the building, because, you know, this almost doesn't matter. The buildings are gonna be 1,000 feet back. Nobody's gonna see them. We talked about moving the buildings to the right-of-way lines. Are we still going with that to try to do 2 things? One, along a highway, it encloses the highway. Right now, when you drive along that highway, you got 5 lanes, and then curb and gutter, sidewalk. Then the code actually requires a 20-foot setback of landscaping, and then parking, and then the building. So you're driving along, you never see the building. It is so far away from the driver, who's also doing 55 miles an hour legally, you know.
45.
So, well, 45 plus, you know.
Ish.
They're all doing at least 50 from what I see when I drive here. And so, I mean, is this what we want? Or do you want somebody to know when they've arrived in Chino and that there's a sense of place here?
Isn't that what that's the whole goal, right?
That's what I thought it was. So, but we're now hashing out. So, I mean, do we have consensus on these ideas that were discussed for months and months and months with the General Plan Committee about moving the buildings up, not allowing parking in the front yard? And that way you can see the building. I mean,
I'm different than all the
Has
rest of you.
anyone
I don't want a
thought,
closed in.
has anyone thought what would happen if the Safeway we have now had to comply with that? And what would happen with their supplies coming in the semis?
They come through the back.
I know they come through the back now, but if that store was up to the front and the parking was in the back, you're gonna find that semi parked right in front of your parking. It's, the reason why some of these things are developed is that there is a truck route that goes around the back of the property so it can drop off the supplies. And if you move the buildings up to the front, where do you think the semis are gonna go?
I think there's some buildings obviously that can't, do that, but
Right.
there can be that big parking lot, Safeway, and buildings in front of it, maybe they're smaller offices, something like that, that are along the street frontage, so that's, I think, the give and
Yeah.
take that you have to have,
Yeah.
so,
And that would be a development of more than just a Safeway store.
right, and maybe their property or their,
And I don't
some
know.
construction or back.
I don't know if we'd ever get a developer in that would be doing that, but that's not the, I'm just raising the point that there are some businesses that need to have a truck route going around the back of their property so they can drop off the supplies and pick up whatever they're picking. And that automatically dictates the parking is in front and the building is in the back of the lot.
Especially if you wanna put a KFC up there. If KFC was in the back, they'd be hidden from the street traffic, they wouldn't be too happy.
But if you put a KFC and it's not a standalone, you were part of that committee when Celia brought in that graphic showing what actually could be done with the existing Safeway shopping center by putting in more buildings along the street frontage. And they're new businesses. They don't take away from Safeway. They're just small one-story businesses, but they start to create that feeling of, oh, this is an interesting area, and you might even want to walk through here, I mean, right now,
Right, but
nobody's
if you
going to
put
want to walk
Safeway on the
anywhere.
front and you put KFC in the back.
We're
then
not saying
you
that.
didn't do that.
We're not saying that. You're not hearing what I just said. The existing Safeway shopping center, the existing Safeway shopping center, and that's what Cecilia was talking about. Big Safeway stores in the back, but instead of just a sea of asphalt going all the way to the street with one little fast food guy on the corner or the gas station, you have a whole row of other businesses, retail businesses along the street frontage. Parking's in the middle then. It's in front of Safeway and it's behind these other retail businesses. This happens in other places. I've even seen major grocery stores in downtowns in major cities. We have to think outside the box on what happens. Go drive around to other cities, go fly to another city, go see what they're doing.
You can always go move to that other city too.
Well, I mean, if you want Chino Valley just stay the way it is right now and never change, then we don't even have to ask to have general plan adopted.
I think a simple move that we're all kind of with is just a first step of changing to earth tone colors so that we don't have a yellow store, a yellow muffler shop to make an eyesore, a mockery.
You're in favor of that?
Of it. No, the yellow?
I mean,
No.
you're in favor of having a color code?
I think a color code, an earth
Okay.
tone, that moves in kind of a neutral
Okay.
neutral ground.
Is everybody on board with some kind of a palette?
I think it's in keeping with the western theme.
Yeah.
You see white buildings, you know, in the western theme, or black buildings in the western theme. You know, I mean, light reflective values, which is really what we're talking about, are pretty common in planning, I think. There's no reason we couldn't have a range of colors that they all within, so you don't get purple buildings and, you know.
So this earth tone palette,
But again, we're skirting that line of, are we, you know, trying to be too architecturally restrictive?
Well, I think that's, earth tones are
That's
really
subjective.
broad.
You have to have a range, you know, the light reflective value, and say if you're between a 40 and an 80%. But if you're way over here at 10, because you want a white building, that's not good. You can't just say earth tones, because that's, you might end up with orange buildings somewhere.
So the light reflective value,
Or,
the light reflective value dictates certain colors aren't gonna be accepted.
exactly.
what's actually in the code now is that front elevation colors should possess low reflectivity characteristics and respect the diversity of color in the southwest.
I think part of the problem we have is that these were written and adopted. Nothing happened. Nothing new was built. So there has not really been the opportunity for these to be exercised. I can tell you, having read through that code several times, I made a mental note of it and went, oh God, I gotta remember this. But we haven't really had that many new commercial buildings in town to even begin addressing these. So I think that some of the language that we have is good. It
We
just
just don't
needs,
know it, maybe.
right, we just haven't had a chance to use it. We haven't really had, sure that, well, let's see, the cancer treatment building, that pretty much fits this, that was new construction. The bank, that was new
Yeah.
construction,
All
that
of the
fits
ones
this
I
now.
showed basically
Right, that-
fits,
Go
yeah.
back one on a horizon. What's that light reflective value?
Yeah, that, the white part
It's been there a
doesn't.
little while. But all those buildings you put up are new buildings, and that's
Right.
what we're trying to address.
Right.
I think we're trying to address something.
Well, the,
Well,
If somebody builds something that's ugly, you know, I mean, that's what we're trying to, but I think they're already following what's in there. You didn't show us any new ugly ones.
I purposely only picked the attractive
Yeah, she
ones.
didn't do ugly one.
I mean, if you really
No, I'm
wanted to
just
see
going
what
through
your
my
town
mind.
looks like, is go
But
and
of the-
pull up Google
I
Earth
drive
and run
through it,
down the
Dave, every
street.
day, I know what it
You
looks
know,
like.
well,
I know what it looks
you
like.
don't, you ignore it because you drive through it every day. If you really stop to take photographs, you start realizing
Show me the
what's
new
going on.
construction that's ugly.
No, that's I purposely only took
Well,
attractive
I'm asking
pictures.
for it. There's a
See,
new
that's what
construction
I'm
that's
trying to
ugly.
think of, is
You're
any
trying to
new
think of it.
construction that really has not followed this. The cancer place did,
That's my point.
the hotel did, National Bank of Arizona did. I'm trying to think what else is down that way that is new construction.
O'Reilly's is
O'Reilly's.
borderline.
O'Reilly's is marginal.
The
Or was
post
that-
office, what about the post office? I mean, that's not brand new,
Yeah.
but do you like that post office?
But how long's the post office been there? It's not gonna even fall under these guidelines.
I know, I mean, nothing we could do about it because it's a federal building.
I
But-
don't find the post office offensive.
I don't think it's that bad.
I think it sucks. We need to push it back further and put all the
Well,
parking.
this
Put all the landscaping in front.
Yeah, and all the semis around the block.
But I mean,
Yeah,
on-site
it
circulation.
goes right with
and
your
the
guidelines there, and it ain't
That
working,
can
man.
definitely be improved. I mean, that's
Oh,
a nightmare, that
That,
whole.
that intersection, in engineering terms, is the worst intersection I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah,
It
it's,
even beats Grand Avenue when it was on an angle. We had all those 6-point intersections. I mean, you got cars coming out of every single direction. There's more right turn arrows, and you don't know what the hell driveway they go to.
right,
People always, I mean, it's very, very congested in that whole section. It's gonna be interesting. Huh? Well, of course, I've complained about that for 11 years.
I know.
in any event, I think that there are ways that we can get to some overarching guideline, and your point's well taken, Tom, most of these new buildings are meeting these guidelines. You know, so
Probably
we already
because their
have.
architects read
this part of the code,
It
Right.
might have been
Right.
you know, and thought, oh, that must be
So why are
required.
I
we
think
spending
the
all this time
issue-
trying to rewrite it? If they're already reading it, following it?
Well,
and
because
doing
it's
it?
really not mandatory. What happens is, there are architects from other communities where those things are required, so they just assume it's gonna be required because it's in the code.
So we need to change it.
So we
from
need to update the
suggested-
code.
It's
Yeah.
required.
It's required.
So,
That took an hour?
There's 20 people there, for an hour.
So, let me just spit this out.
yeah,
You don't have an issue with the wordage in there, you just wanna be able to enforce it. Because all of these new buildings basically say, or show the look that we're all expecting Chino Valley would like.
they were done voluntarily,
I agree.
right.
But they must have had some sort of guideline to do that, and does the code now say that, but nobody's ever read it or enforced it? Or is it a suggestion, and we need to say instead of a suggestion, this is what you got.
I'm guessing this was adopted in 2010, because the ordinance number is 10-729.
Yep.
So it's relatively new, and
But clearly it's being enforced because some of these buildings were, when was NBAZ, was just built, what, in the last 2 years?
Right.
yeah.
And you don't know what they went through at the technical review committee meetings, because that's where they would discuss all of this.
Right. I mean,
They
I
would
could drag
discuss the
minutes on it.
requirements and say, here, this is, here's some of the things that we recommend that you do.
So
We're not
maybe
gonna
instead of
approve.
just recommending, maybe we need to put a little bit more of some teeth into it, to where we can wind up with buildings like that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to me that any of those buildings are cookie cutter in any fashion, but they all have a general sort of look to it.
Mhm.
And so if the code is doing that now, and we've just been fortunate that that the people did it that way, then maybe we need to fix it so we don't have to depend on good fortune, we just want them to do it that way. So maybe there's nothing wrong with the wordage in the code, it's just maybe the teeth that are involved in it.
Well, there's problems with the wordage.
Okay.
It needs to say required.
That's exactly
You
what
know,
I'm telling you.
that's the least of it. But there are some other things that are not in here, like this idea of, where's the location of the building? There's nothing in there about that.
Requiring to move it, the buildings to move forward is wise at all. If you have a 1 acre piece on the highway, to try to create a drive between the building and your property line, you're just killing the usable space. I know in my case, because asphalt was required, I want my parking to be up front. If my parking's in the back, it's just gonna cost me that much more money to pay to get everybody back there instead of to the front. And again, we wanna promote business here, not create more things that are gonna cost that much more. I think with the standard that we've already adopted, it's already a big step up for Chino from our dirt parking lots that we've had forever.
Yeah, but with your situation, we agreed to allow you to take some time before you had to pave your parking lot. In fact, we even talked about millings.
Yes.
Bringing in millings for dust,
Yes.
So, I mean, there's other things that can be done. You still got the paving done. And before you got here, I commented how nice your area looks.
Thank you.
And the thing of it is, I didn't want to tell you that, but you forced me into it. But the whole thing of it is that we can do things that say, all right, you got a couple, 3 or 4 years, wait to see what's gonna happen. But he followed through with everything he said he was gonna do, and his place looks really nice, his trucks. And he
Well,
just- he parked
what
his truck.
about relaxing some of the paving requirements? I mean, if it's a major, high-traffic business like a Safeway, I can see the need for real asphalt. But if it isn't, maybe millings are all they need. It keeps the dust down. I know I got my street put down with nothing but millings on dirt, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I think if you're looking at a high profile, like a Safeway, like a Walmart or whatever, there's no question, they're gonna pave it. They don't want their people walking around in that. But when you got, like his company is the only ones that go in there except for his customers, and there's not a lot of walk-in trade, that's a whole different ballgame. Talk about the mom and pop. You can back off a little bit on the paving. The dust is what you're really concerned about now, but I think eventually they should be required to pay within a certain block of time, you know. But I don't, I think some of the businesses that we would attract here, there would be no question about the pay. You know, you don't, the new Walmart out in Prescott Valley, no
yeah,
question.
right.
And they don't want their people walking in dirt. Sure saving a lot of money, but that's not the way it goes.
So we're back to the deal of do the buildings
Where they
be pushed up to the
So,
front?
speaking
How
of,
about we think of, I'm sorry, Celia, go
oh, I
ahead.
was just gonna say, speaking of that new Walmart in Prescott Valley, there are lands that are plotted right along the street frontage that will eventually be built. So those buildings are gonna be along the street frontage and the parking's behind, so I think that's the same concept.
The
That-
shopping center though.
The
It's a
front,
shopping center, it's not a single standalone unit, and I think that's the difference in what
Yes.
the two of you are saying, is that in a shopping center, you absolutely have an opportunity. A lot of them are PAD developments because they put those pads out front to get their, you know, their impulse businesses like Jack in the Box, whatever, out there along the front, and that's an ideal place to have the parking in the middle. But if you just have this little one driveway, it's just me and maybe one other office in my building, it's kind of hard to bring that concept to reality. Although, you know, the old Stockman's building is pushed all the way to the front, and the parking is in the back. So we do have a couple along the highway that are like that, but if you look at that convenience store on the corner of 2 South, the one on the corner that has the gas station out front,
Right.
all the parking's in the back. But nobody ever parks in the back. They pull up to the front and park right in the don't park here, it's a fire lane, because they just wanna run into the convenience store for a minute and come back out.
Oh, the show?
Yeah, so it's hard to get people to park in the back, because they, I don't know, I kind of feel like I'm walking in the back door when I park in the back and then I have to walk around the front of the building. So I think it's gonna be hard to get people to kind of change their mindset of how they're used to frequenting businesses. But most businesses have parking right by the front door. For ADA laws and other things too, the parking is always as close to the front door as you can get it. So I like the idea for the shopping centers, but I think it's gonna be tough for the individual sites. I do.
this building right here is not pulled to the front, and you can see it as you drive by every day.
Yeah, because there's never any cars.
Right.
Which a business likes to
They
have
use it
cars
maybe
all
once a
over their
week.
business.
That's it.
The point being, almost all of the
What's
buildings.
going on there?
Yeah, if you see an empty parking lot, then are they still there? You
Yeah.
drive right by. A lot of
Who goes
people
to a
like to
restaurant
park
with an
cars out.
empty parking
Empty
lot?
park-
Exactly.
You know?
Almost all the buildings that we looked at in this group of pictures were not up to the front of the property.
I know, that's because the code right now forces them to go back.
So I think maybe that's one of the things we talk about, rather than, you know, the front to back is the type of use that the zoning district and the setback requirements in those zoning districts. Because I think if you had a commercial light building like the dentist's office that was closer to the street, or, you know, a coffee shop or something like that, does need to be closer to the street, whereas your business, clearly, you've got, what, 3, 4, 5 people that might show up on any given day, that would be a crowded day. You don't need a huge parking lot to receive customers. Most of your stuff is on the phone. So why should you have to be set way back, you know, and have all this parking out front, when it's easier and more cost-effective for you to be closer to the front and have the parking here? Where an industrial building, you want them back away from the road. I mean, I think of the acres of dirt in front of the Ford plants I used to drive by all the time. They had full-time lawnmowers, that's all these guys did, was mow the lawn. And, you know, those were set back, they were landscaped so that they were softened up, and I'm talking massive.
Yeah. Well,
acres
those
of
have nothing
building.
to do with pedestrian orientation. Those are
But what I'm saying
suburban
is,
manufacturing plants. So, you know, let's think about the future of Chino. Which way should it go as
I
it
think you're
develops?
seeing the future of Chino like Scott's doing. I don't see that happening.
What's wrong with that building right there? Would you move that, Sue? How would you design that?
I don't think it's pedestrian friendly at all. I can't walk to it from another location in Chino. I have to get in my car and I have to drive there. And that's my whole intent of what I'm trying to say. If we continually have people building the way we have everything set up, we're going to be dependent on cars. constantly. And in some of these core areas, we need to push these buildings in so that we don't have that dependency, and we're not gonna create a community feel until we get out of our cars and walk around a couple buildings. And it's gonna be better for all of the people that are in that location, for every, if it's a restaurant, if it's a coffee shop, if it's, anything like that. So obviously, there's some areas or some buildings, some types of buildings that are going to have different requirements and different needs. But for these core areas that we're talking about, we have to start enforcing these ideas, or else Chino is going to grow, and it's going to look bigger than what you want it to. And everybody keeps saying, we want a small county, we want a small county, but it's.
So where do we stand on the building locations?
I think we're a small town with a big town mentality. People just build whatever they want to, and they've been allowed to. And now we're trying to rein it in, and without causing a lot of hate and discontent and hurt feelings. I don't think it's gonna happen here in the next 10 years.
But I think we can do some things. I think we can do some things to make it, and not be cookie cutter, not to do those things that make everything look, but make it look nice. Because that's one thing. I remember when coming up from Phoenix and going through Prescott Valley, it was terrible. I mean, the place was terrible to drive through. I'm sorry, but they've done so much to change that town because of that. They started doing
And the
those,
majority of it's landscape.
and it's
They
landscaping and
landscaped it and softened it up,
But
and it looks
it-
good.
But there are no design guidelines, other than in that, other than the, entertainment center. I mean, we have signage guidelines and things like that, but there's no dictating building colors, building material, any of that kind of stuff, nothing.
But every new commercial development has to be a PAD, so it gives the town complete control over
Council
everything.
approve every site plan,
Yep.
every one.
Including McDonald's. I'm sorry, Walmart's and, kids that don't understand them in the meeting. No, yes, they do approve every single one, and we did use the PAD overlay quite a bit, so we could make adjustments that needed to be made. So that things did look pleasant.
But we
You
want-
can't say ugly,
Yeah.
because what I think is ugly, you may not think is ugly. I love that dentist or doctor's building on 89 there, the one that looks like it's out of a Dr. Seuss book.
Yeah.
If I were
I
a
do too.
kid, that would be great. I think that's a great building. Other people think I'm crazy. I love the library.
But you want to make the town enticing, so people want to come and build here, and they want to come bring their businesses here.
Yeah.
And you don't, when we first moved here, the trash and stuff all along the road, I mean, it was a mess, it was ugly. And, when they finally cleaned it up and started setting some standards. it
We have
started-
spent hours talking about being business friendly, and all of our talk, I'm not sure anybody's listening, because I don't think we're exactly business friendly.
And don't look at Corey when you say that.
He's my neighbor, he's a good guy.
Your
So-
mic's one.
Yeah.
Hi.
But we've been talking since the day that the general plan started, we didn't want to be like Scottsdale. I know. And so, and I agree with you, I finally did get down to Scottsdale. We're nowhere close.
Right. No,
Well,
no
Scottsdale
comparison.
has changed immensely.
Yeah.
When somebody brought up the original, and it's still there, but now it's got a roundabout in it and all kinds of stuff. When I was a kid, you go to Scottsdale, there was horses actually on the thing. I mean, but now you look at North Scottsdale, it's totally different. And I'm not sure they've got a theme, but I don't know which it would be.
They keep trying to call themselves the most western town, and it's a laughing stock,
Yeah, yeah, it's only got one block of that.
No, but that's a good example where a community needs to decide what image they want. They obviously, even though they use that little theme, they obviously didn't want to be a western town. And they went for modern, and a major looking city appearance. So, just like in Prescott Valley, Prescott Valley said, I want to be a vibrant urban area. And they're all pushing to that. That's why they have those different kinds of government-looking buildings, and things like that. I don't see Chino Valley doing that. I mean, I was looking at the logo of the town, and we're still showing the antelope and the windmills, but we put horses on the entrance piece. And, I was just rationalizing, what changed there? What happens to the image of somebody coming into town for the first time? Now, to me, horses, especially up and rearing like they are, they say strength and movement, An antelope doesn't give you that same impression. Prescott Valley, back in the 80s, 90s, decided to change their logo into something that reflected a vibrant community, a growing community. So, they have the kind of the sunburst logo that they adopted then, and it fits them very well. So, it's like Chino man, I worked with you guys in 1990 on your general plan, and nothing's changed. You have some nice newer buildings, but the community still doesn't know what it wants to be, is what I'm hearing. On this commission, I'm hearing, all these different sides, like, well, I mean, you can.
I think Chino's nothing more than an affordable place to live.
So should that continue to be the vision of the community? Do you want that to be the vision?
I don't necessarily know it's a vision, but it's the truth of the matter.
Yes, I agree, that is what it is.
Most people came to Chino because they couldn't afford, to live in Scottsdale, and it's.
Right.
It's where we could afford to live. That's why I lived in Chino Meadows 1, is where we lived first. It's because that's what we could afford.
Right.
It didn't have sidewalks, it didn't have streetlights, but it was affordable. Now, did we need a grocery store? Well, yes. And at that time, I guess it was Bayless that came in first. They seen a customer base there, and they came in and built the first grocery store. But it was to accommodate the people, so they could make money. And I think that's what Chino is.
There is also a contingent, though, that chose this over Prescott and Prescott Valley. That's where my brother lives, that's where my mother lives, one in each. And I like my open spaces, I like my couple acres, I like my horses. And I wasn't gonna get that in most of Prescott Valley.
And I would agree, I did choose Chino over Prescott Valley.
I see a little yuppie version of Chino, of PV that I'm not interested in at all. And I see a little bit more rural atmosphere, a little less concrete out here, and I like it. And so I don't want all my parking lots paved, unless it's on highway. But that's why I didn't buy on the highway, and that's what I said over and over again when we talk about those KOA people that were unhappy with it. You shouldn't have bought a block off the highway.
How I feel about your asphalt is if you have a competitor that pays his parking lot, and you're losing business because they don't want to walk across the gravel, then you're going to look back and say, boy, maybe I better pay my parking lot. Well, at that point, that's your choice. And that capitalism takes over.
So what is the consensus of this group?
Consensus is there's no consensus.
What are you looking for consensus on?
Well,
Specific?
the question was, do we want to add an addendum to the general plan that addresses this idea of creating or upgrading design development standards without writing the regulations, but that just addresses it as something that the community wants, because the community wants to change its image from just appearing to be a cheap place to live. That's what it's about. If you want to create an image that you're proud of, that gives you a real sense of community, then you have to have some kind of development standards. And you have to use them.
We've been talking about the sense of place all through this process.
Yeah.
And that is like the foundation of creating a sense of place. So my goal is to put it in the general plan, and the commission and the council will work through what the details are. I think we should at least say that it is a desire, or whether we pursue the desire or not, will be up to, what the officials themselves. But if we don't say it's even on our radar, then we have no chance of even.
Now, we do have
Thinking
it
about it.
listed as a step,
Right.
that we're gonna upgrade the UDO for this stuff. So that's in there under the goal for the land use element. So adding some language and maybe some of the photographs of these newer buildings that seem to fit the standards everybody likes, I guess. That's the kind of thing I had in mind, was just a few pages that would be an addendum talking about those concepts, and saying that, this is what the community feels to create a sense of community, a sense of place. There needs to be some consistency in how development happens. And we can leave out the location of buildings, because that seems to be a big deal, although that is in the language of the general plan already. When we talked about the cores, we talked all about how you've got to have the buildings close together.
If it's in a specific area, that
Yeah.
shouldn't be a problem.
Right.
But generally, throughout the town, I see that as a huge problem. So, I think all of us would agree we need to set some standards, and maybe just taking this first step will allow us to muck through it later.
Yeah, I mean, there'd be a lot more steps later to go in and try to analyze what's in various parts of the code that affect development standards and make them consistent with the desires, because they're not even consistent with each other right now,
Well,
Much
we
less
should
what,
do-
what everybody wants.
Does everybody agree that that's something that we should be all for? Moving forward to develop some sort of standards for the community?
Certain locations.
In certain, standards, meaning this area gets this done to it, that area gets that done to it. Not all of it under a blanket.
Okay, and so I had down as one of the consensus, that was for properties fronting 89 and those in community cores, period. And that would be non-residential.
I think that's the best we can get tonight.
It is, because I'm getting hungry.
I am too.
Okay, well,
Come on, I just paid my driveway.
But that was your choice.
now, does the
Yes,
commission
dear.
have a meeting scheduled for the 18th?
Not of this month.
No. Okay.
So we'll be back in April 7th, I think, is the next meeting. This is
April 1st is your next meeting.
The first Tuesday.
The first Tuesday is April 1st. That, by the way, is the public hearing on the general plan.
That's right.
April Fool's Day.
April
we're gonna
Fool's
have
Day,
a-
right?
It's been out to the public now for what? 60
Since
days?
January 6th.
Have you had any comments at all?
Of course not.
No.
Really not?
How'd you guess?
No.
That's about the same amount
I
of
mean-
people that came and listened to our.
Yeah,
They wait till you're supposed to sign it, then they come in and tell you
Yeah.
what's wrong.
yeah. I mean, they may all show up at
You're right, it is
on
April
April 1st. There's no telling what's going to happen, and so, and if the commission, will have to do a full presentation of the general plan, because it is the public hearing. And then it's up to the commission if they want to recommend approval, modifications, continue to another meeting, whatever, So, depending upon what kind of comments we
Well,
get.
that would totally be dependent on the comments and the people that are there.
Yeah. So that's the plan right now, so,
They won't have any comments till it's time to vote for it, then they'll tell us what's wrong.
And then for the next 10 years. Thereafter. You know what you should do?
okay, so, what's really unclear to me is I've never done an addendum to a general plan before.
Sure idea.
Well, this all started with some other ideas, and so if we can get something together, I will email everybody with drafts and ask for your comments, and then we can discuss it on April 1st if that's the desire to do that. So I think that's probably.
We're not supposed to address it to the whole group, right?
Oh,
Just
that's
back
right.
to you.
You have to make, yes, for new members, this is the open meeting laws, Gary. You can never respond to all.
You probably don't even have my email.
I do not, as a matter of fact. So we better get that.
I gave it to you. Okay.
Yes.
Nice. Why don't you give it to me
And I'm
before
sure
you
once you
leave?
write it down, go, oh, yes, I do have this.
So, I think that's the best we can do is kind of come up with some drafts and say, you know, what do you think about this? And if there's consensus for it, we can have it move along with the general plan. If there isn't, then we can maybe let the general plan just go on its way, and then we can work on this in more. We have to come back to it for code revisions anyway, you know. But it was just an idea to put a step in there because, you know, the opposition I'm hearing from a couple of you is that you're worrying that it's going to drive businesses out of town and all this kind of stuff. You know, I've been a planner for a long time, and I've heard all those arguments before, and then I saw all those communities blossom because they had design standards. So, you know, Chino at some point has to decide what they want to be. Right.
Unfortunately, it's
Yes. Okay, well, anybody have any other comments?
I have
Yeah.
a question, and tell me if this isn't the right place or not. Property that's being used, that has no structures on it, what
We call that bare
guidelines?
land.
Pardon me?
We call that bare land.
Bare land.
Vacant land.
But they're using it for parking and things like this. Since they have not applied for any type of building code, they don't have to then have a dust resurface.
It depends upon what they're using it for. I mean, if it's, and it depends upon the zoning. If it's dead storage in an industrial area, we treat that differently, and if it's a industrial zoning district, then we would, if it were a vacant land, if it were a vacant lot in a residential neighborhood that everybody's using for all of their companies to park on. So they're different. So it depends upon who's parking what where and for what purpose.
Or what they're using it for.
Right, and what the zoning is, because if it's zoned appropriately, you can have dead storage, you can park vehicles in a dead storage area.
And then they're not subject to the landscaping, they're not subject to the dust-free driving surface?
They should be, it's whether or not we've caught up with them yet or not.
But yes, they should be.
Yes, if they're gonna use it for dead storage, and they're in an industrial zoning class, they should be meeting that minimum standard.
Is fencing part of?
I'd have to go look. Because it's been a while since I've looked at industrial. I don't like to say it without my book in front of me.
Okay.
Oh, that's right.
That's all lowercase.
Yeah, I do have that. I told
That's
you.
exactly what she said.
When I go, oh, yeah.
I need to talk to you later then.
Okay, thank you all for your
Thanks,
comments, and please, everybody, be at that April 1st meeting, because we're going to ask the general plan committee members to address a lot of it for any questions that come up.
I have a meeting down for the 18th, are we still doing that?
Well, we just heard there's no planning commission meeting scheduled for the 18th. Is that going to change or not?
Not unless we
That's too
add
late.
some-
Okay.
Well, there was other nurses videos.
So April 1st is the public hearing.
Well, that would be videos, so you could watch it. I'll be California.
Oh, yeah, you were going to be out of town. Yeah, because all the public hearings are televised.
Where I work, okay, where I live. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you all.
Who's
going to call the
Where we work.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
I think I lost my quorum. I lost my quorum.
Oh.